Are you struggling to land a Salesforce job? You're actually getting interviews, but struggling to lock it in? Well, this is where practice comes in and why I've been creating a lot of these mock interviews. So, for today's mock interview, we will be doing a junior to mid level Salesforce developer role. This one is really great because we dive a little bit deeper into technical aspect of things instead of keeping it more broad and generalized. A lot of these questions are very similar to what you will probably get in an actual interview, really asking about your experience and drilling down deeper into what the best practices actually mean. All right. Hello, Smita. Thank you so much for joining me on this interview. I'm super excited. And I think you kind of heard a little bit about the background from our internal recruiter, but I'm Warren. I know you kind of got that from the initial email that we set up, but I'm Warren, the senior developer here at Universal Containers. And we are definitely looking for somebody to help out with some of the more complex pieces inside of our organization, which is why we're talking to you today. So I guess thanks for being here. And of course, the obligatory question, please tell me about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Warren, for having me for today's interview. I am currently looking for junior or a Salesforce mid-level developer. So Universal Container seems to be a great place to be right now. I have briefly had a look at the website and the amazing things Universal Containers is currently doing in its Salesforce space. And then it definitely seems like a challenging role to be a part of, challenging company to be a part of. Yeah. To introduce myself, my name is Smita, and I have been in Salesforce ecosystem for about 5 years now. I started out as an administrator and then worked my way up to hybrid administrator, developer, and then I also have a business analyst certification. So I've always worked as a hybrid Salesforce go-to person in all of my organizations that I've worked so far. Specifically, my last role that was with for sure. I had an opportunity to, dedicate some time to looking at the development tasks. So as part of it, I got to do some hands-on Visual Force pages, Apex, and then Aura components. So yeah, I really enjoyed doing all that, and then I thought I would dedicate some time to, learn the best practices and claim the role of Salesforce developer officially. So that's the reason I applied for this role.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's really good learning about you and a awesome progression that you've gone through from starting out from the administrative side and then moving all the way up to those more hybrid roles and then actually starting to work with development. So from our side, we're definitely looking for somebody who has that sort of background, who can know the declarative tools but and when to use them, but also how those interact with Apex and some of the more programmatic sides of Salesforce development and building out the platform. So
Yeah.
from that standpoint, I'm kind of curious. You know, you mentioned that you had experience with Aura and Visual Force pages. Is that what you're comfortable with now, or do you use any other like UI or I guess front end design languages inside of Salesforce?
Yeah. Offshore had a lot of legacy Visual Force pages, and for some reason, the developer Offshore had made a business decision not to hire developers and just keep going with the administration. So it was a great opportunity for me to dive in and then do the Visual Force pages. But as we all know, Salesforce is moving away from Visual Force pages and then also Aura components. So it was a great opportunity to for me to upskill at LWCs. So there I had started the process of migrating few Visual Force pages to LWCs. So I can say that I'm comfortable with um, small to medium complexity LWCs, wherein I successfully rebuilt. And it was also a great opportunity to, not just rebuild the way it is, to dig in really whether do we need this functionality. And then there was a like a chance to revisit and review. So it was wherein I could use my BA skills and then, yeah, develop it as per the updated needs of the company. So I would say that LWCs is definitely where I got exposed to as part of this migration process.
Cool. And did you have any maybe significant challenges from migrating any of the components or the things that were built legacy into LWC? Like, what was that situation like? What was the primary task for you?
Yeah. Um, Obviously, as a beginner to LWCs, the learning curve was huge, but I took it up as a challenge. And fortunately, there was a lead on my team as well. So I could borrow some of the best practices and then just learn from the implementations that were already done by this lead person, and then, take them on board and then just not do it in a you know, cowboy approach, I would say, but do it in a something that follows the best practices and something that is up to the standards.
Okay. And can you tell me
Yeah.
about some of the best practices that you implemented? Maybe just give me one, for example, or something that you learned from building out these LWC or converting from the Visualforce Aura into LWC.
Yeah, with regards to LWCs, I can say that instead of just using .css files, I got to use a um, um, lot of styling sheets that Salesforce readily provides out of the box. So I could use a few of those, and then instead of rebuilding everything from the scratch, there are like already tons of reusable components that Salesforce has put out. So I could use them and then tweak them as per the needs. So it wasn't like building, there is a lot of development work. There was a lot of identifying which can be reused for our need, and then which can be, taken on board and tweaked to our new needs. So it was more about well, like how much effort to put in, and then, where to put in that effort. So it was a mix of like reading the existing code and then understanding how can we redevelop it, and if we can redevelop it, if there is something already existing, and then can we take that on board and then, tweak it to our needs.
Cool. And I guess this is kind of moving into the Apex realm as well. So did any of these LWCs that you're building have Apex controllers that were associated to them? Did you end up reusing those? How did that kind of work with the new things that you were building out?
With regards to LWCs, not much. I haven't come across anything that needed like heavy Apex, just something that would do nominal function. But when it came to migrating Visualforce pages to LWCs, there was a lot of custom controllers. So because we were not building them as it is in LWCs, as I mentioned, there was a review. So as part of it, we had to tweak these Apex classes to the updated needs. So as part of that, I got to update few custom controllers, and then so it was a good learning curve for me with regards to Apex as well. Yeah.
I gotcha. And I'm curious now because I know we've been, talking a lot about LWC. You said you also had some Apex background. Can you kind of tell me a little bit more about that, what you've been exposed to, and your understanding from that standpoint?
Yeah. My Apex journey started like really very simply. So when I was at Osho, I was given this task of security review. So we used Gearset. So Gearset had highlighted security issues, and few of the Apex security issues that it highlighted was SOQL injections and stuff. So back then I didn't know anything about Apex, so I started understanding what is this SQL injection and stuff like that. So that's when I realized that, okay, there is a lot to learn with regards to best practices. And I started in my own time, I started implementing Apex classes and understanding all these best practices, and then started, implementing it to get rid of the security issues. So that's how my Apex journey started. And then ever since then, I've been teaching myself best practices, and then where possible, I would go back and then re-implement the best practices in my code.
Okay, so did you run into any significant like hurdles or situations while you were working through those gear set errors that were coming through, or I guess those warnings that were coming through? And how did you like overcome any roadblocks that you faced with that?
Yeah, the security issues it was flagging. The gay set was flagging were like a bit anonymous for me at that point. So it required a huge learning curve on understanding exactly first what it is saying, and then understanding why is it saying, and then come up with the solution for it. So it was the journey from understanding what it is, why it is, and then how can we correct it is it was something that was time consuming, but I took my time to get from A to C, I would say. And then yeah, that's when I also sought help of some of the community members, and then I enrolled myself in a developer kickstart program called Cloud Code Academy, and that immensely helped me in um, leveraging my overall understanding of how Apex works and then why it works. And then I was able to take those learnings back to my problems that I had at work, and then yeah, I was able to you know um, like answer them efficiently, I would say. Yeah, otherwise I would have taken just trial and error approach, try and get rid of the error that I'm having currently, and then not having a deeper understanding of why it is doing so, and then come up with the efficient solution.
Okay, and yeah, that seems like you definitely use a lot of great resources to then supplement all of the different areas that you are learning and doing research on. And from our standpoint at Universe Containers, we do need somebody who can go out and look for those solutions and try to understand it, but then knows how to also reach out to more senior people like myself and the rest of the team when they need that best practice help, like you mentioned. So that's great to hear from that standpoint. The other question that I had, and it's based on something that you mentioned around Apex best practices. So it's going to start out very broad, right? Can you tell me about some Apex best practices that you know about, that you can think of, that you've read? Tell me about those, and then we'll talk about them a little bit deeper.
Yeah. The first thing, as I mentioned, SQL injections. So avoiding SQL injections by using bind variables and other best practices that are out there. And then I would say avoiding for loops. Um, uh, like putting, yeah, um, just for loop dependency that causes us to hit the governor limits, and thinking other best practices that we can use. When it comes to triggers, I would say implementing trigger framework, and then just going with one trigger per class, like per object, I would say. And yeah, I think and then with regards to Apex, it's not definitely with regards to Apex, like not coding, use clicks first approach. That is not Apex best practice, but it is a best practice on its own. Yeah, I would say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm going to drill into one of the things that you've mentioned here, and it's on the one trigger per object. And I'm trying to get an idea of like, we know that's a best practice. We see it, we read it all the time, but can you tell me why it's a best practice? Like, how does it help? Why do we do that?
Yeah. So the recommendation for about why one trigger per class is like because Salesforce doesn't guarantee If there are like multiple triggers on the same object, which one would run first? So I think that is the reason why this press practice has been put out there, saying that because you don't know which trigger, um, if there are like multiple triggers on the same object, you don't know which trigger is going to run first, and that might cause some complications in your org. So it is best recommended to implement a trigger framework and then have one trigger per class so that you have an understanding, like you can organize when should the trigger actually run. So does it have to be before or after, before insert or delete or update or yeah, undelete.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. And yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? That execution order is not guaranteed. So as much as we can control it on our level as developers, we want to try to do that based on having one trigger per object. And that also bleeds into some of the other declarative things that we work on, like in flows and stuff like that. Um, I do want to talk about flows, but I'll continue on the trigger topic for a minute here. So from tell me about your understanding with triggers. Like you mentioned before triggers, after triggers. Like what's the difference between a before trigger and an after trigger?
Yeah. I would like to answer it functionality wise. So before trigger is when you would use for like throwing custom errors before the record is saved, and you want to do some quick updates. Say for example, you want the triggering record to be updated with something, then you can use before trigger. And after trigger is something wherein you have a situation wherein you have to update related records or you have to do some complex calculation is when you use after trigger.
Okay, and let's say that I am building out a validation that is dependent on maybe a child record. So, give me a more concrete example. We're working on the opportunity. We need a validation on the opportunity product that if the product isn't set to active or the amount is, or I guess the product quantity isn't greater than a certain amount, we need to build some sort of validation. But we're not trying to do it in a declarative fashion. So, what type
Mhm.
of trigger? How would we build this out?
I think it would use after trigger because it is something that needs to be displayed on the child object.
Hmm.
So you would have access to the child object that you want to throw on the error for in the after trigger context. So I would use after trigger and then throw a custom error on the child object when it meets the scenario, when it meets the requirement that is there.
Okay, and if we let's say that the error needed to show up on the opportunity, the I guess the parent at that point, how would you design this differently, or how would you make that? We're sitting on an opportunity, but we want to
Mhm.
check values in a child, so an opportunity product, or I guess it's an opportunity line item. We want to check those values down there, and before we're able to save, like actually save an amount value that's on the opportunity.
Mm, I'll have to think that through. Yeah. I would say I can just take a guess on this one. I would maybe after trigger, but I'll have to figure out how would I do exactly this one. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay, and no problem. This is why you have the senior developers here that will be able to help guide you through these types of scenarios. And then
Yeah.
we don't expect everybody to know everything off the top of their head. So,
Yeah.
okay, so that's good to hear though. Um, So now switching gears a little bit into like asynchronous Apex, how much asynchronous Apex have you been exposed to? What are you comfortable with? What have you worked with before? How does that
Yeah.
work with you?
I have used future methods in the past for like simple implementations, and then of late there was a scenario wherein we had to use queuable. So I would say my exposure to async as a um, junior developer or a mid-level developer is minimal, but I do know when is async Apex is used and what are the possible ways we can run Apex in asynchronous mode.
Okay.
Um, I would say that future is something like labeling the method as future method is something that is not recommended by Salesforce. You would use the most, um, you know, uh, the new to the market asynchronous Apex.
Okay.
Yeah,
And so we're kind of hearing and finding out that, maybe future methods aren't the best to use.
yeah,
So we've got the queuables and batch Apex, and I guess scheduled Apex as well. Can you kind of give
yeah.
me an example of when you would want to use like each of those types
Mhm.
of asynchronous Apex?
Yeah. So I would use future methods wherein like I don't have any dependency. Like for example, there is something that is not waiting for this process to come back. So I would then label a method as future so that it can do its thing and then send the response back, and there is nothing else that is dependent on this. I would use future then. So I would use Batchable when I have like tons and tons of data that needs to be processed in batches. As we know, 200 is the 200 is like the standard Salesforce limit. So it would be nice to use Batchable in there so that it processes the data in 200 chunks of 200s. And then schedulable is, of course, you are able to schedule and then you get to choose like at what interval that you want to use. There's one quirk there, like if you want to be able to use, if you want to be able to schedule through UI, you can schedule the minimum that you can schedule is on hourly basis. So if you want to go for half an hourly or something like that, then you would have to do it Apex way. I haven't done that, but that is something that I know that can be done. And then coming to queuables, queuable is a great way wherein you use NQ job wherein you get a job ID that you can track using UI, and then you also are able to chain the jobs. So I think that makes it really interesting wherein you get a job ID so that you can track it and then you're able to chain it so that you have a track of how many chains of jobs that are there. And then I think the maximum number of chainable jobs is 5. So that is something that I know about, but I would love to, implement that and then see it for myself in the real org.
Cool. And yeah, I think you went over it really well there. One thing that I will mention is that limit with the chains that you mentioned at the end. It's most likely different depending on the org that you're in. So if you're in like an enterprise org, you may have
Okay.
more that you're able to go through, and you're most likely working on like a Trailhead org or a free developer org, which they limit you down quite a bit with that. So just keep that in mind as you're working with the different additions and even sandboxes that you're going through. And I guess speaking of sandboxes, can you tell me what sandboxes are, why they're useful in Salesforce development?
Yeah. So if we were to um if I were to give a textbook answer, there are like 4 types of sandboxes: dev, dev pro, and then partial, and then full sandbox. And then we also have something called Scratch orgs now. Where in dev, dev pro, they can be used for development, and then partial sandboxes for like you can use it for UAT, and then full sandboxes like you can use it as a staging environment. Depends entirely how your org wants to how your company wants to use these orgs, but they have different capacities. So it starts from 200 to 1 GB to 5 GB to full capacity. And then with regards to metadata, with regards to data, I would say Dev and Dev Pro won't have any data. And then partial sandbox, it will have, I think, partial, just a subset. And then full sandbox would look exactly like your product so that it can be used as a staging environment so that you can be absolutely sure before putting it out to prod that okay, it's gonna work just like this, just the way it worked in staging environment.
Yeah, and you mentioned so putting it out to prod. What is that process of moving the metadata around? How do you actually do that?
Yeah. So there are like I would say three ways. And then I have primarily worked like there are three ways like chain set, you can do that. And then there is org-based development model, and then there is package-based development model. I have worked in organizations wherein there was chain set based development model where they created chain sets. This was like using internal Salesforce chain sets, or it was using get set chain sets, which are like same. And then there was org-based development model wherein at Osho we tried it for a little bit, wherein you could directly deploy to the org that you are connected to. And there's one more called package-based development model, which I haven't had a chance to, work with, wherein you create your package.xml and then you mention what are the metadata that you want to transfer over, and yeah, things like that.
And are there any limitations to deploying things to production?
With regards to chain set based model, you need to have a inbound outbound connection. I would say inbound connection from the prod so that it accepts the data, so that it accepts the deployments from your sandbox. So you have to have that. And if we were to go for org-based development model, you just need to be connected to that org in your VS Code so that you can deploy that to your destination org.
Okay. And what about for your code? Is there any like validation that needs to go on to get it moved around?
Oh, yes. For your code, you need to have your test classes.
Mm-hmm.
They shouldn't be throwing any unhandled exceptions, and you need to have that 75 percentage test coverage for your all Apex classes. That's a must.
Okay. Yeah, and totally right from our side. And one thing that we have struggled with, at least in the past, is making sure that we're maintaining a high level of code coverage for all of our code. So that is definitely something that we would have you take a look at and probably work on as one of your first tasks to really start to understand the code base as you get up to speed. So I'm curious, we're talking a little bit more about testing. What is your experience with testing? Have you done it before? What are some of the best practices that you know about when writing
Yeah.
tests?
Yeah, like this may be a bit irrelevant, but I started my um, tech journey as a manual tester, so I know how important it is to the testing is to any organization. I started out as a manual tester and then moved on to become automation tester, wherein I had to write code to test the code. Apex testing was something that I was obviously passionate about and know more about. Um, so I've been writing test classes, and although the standard percentage that is expected is 75%, I always endeavor to have higher test code coverage and then make sure that I create test data in such a way that it touches, it touches the parts of code wherein there may not be a scenario wherein like people would use that, but it's definitely very important to create your test data in such a way that it touches those part of the code wherein it gets tested thoroughly, so that we don't receive bad news from the prod saying that you just wrote positive happy parts and then you didn't test negative parts, and then somehow it just got slipped from final testing as well, and then now we have an issue from the prod.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think everything you just mentioned right there is definitely important for the way you like generate and design your tests. I'm gonna go, I guess, a little bit more in the weeds and say, is there any types of things specifically you want to have in your code when you're writing them out? How either you structure your code or get specific data? Like, how does that work for you, or what do you know
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah. So to create my test data, I would use the like obviously that like I know of there are like three standard ways of creating your test data. You create them, sorry, you create them directly in your test class, or you can use test setup, or you can use test data factory, the utility class. So my personal preference would be to use test data factory, and then so that it is the test data is available throughout. Whereas if you use test setup, that would be available for the test class, which is also kind of gives an advantage, but it really depends on the scenario that you're trying to test. And there's a worst case scenario wherein you could do see all data true, but that is something that's not recommended.
Awesome. And then what
Yeah.
about the actual testing of your code? So the making sure that a method or the results of a method is actually doing what you're expecting it to do. So what kind of code do you write around that to make sure that your code is doing what it's supposed to do?
Yeah. So in the test method, I would call the method that is being tested, and then I would use assert, saying, okay, is it so now that I'm calling this test method, assert that this is what the expected result is, and there I would know whether it is doing its job or not.
Yeah, and for us, it is very important to make sure that all of the code that we're working with has those asserts values, and it's holding it up to that high standard of at least making sure that our we have asserts for everything. They are meaningful tests. We have positive and negative tests inside of all of our code. So
Yeah.
I think it's good that you know about that because it'll be really easy to bring you into the team and make sure that you kind of understand the flow of how everything is working.
Yeah.
I'll once again, I guess, kind of switch gears into integration. So I want to hear, do you have any experience working with integrations? What do you know about them?
Yeah. With regards to integrations, my exposure is basic, but I do understand how integrations work, and then like what are the moving parts of it. In my organization, when it came to integration, they chose to use MuleSoft. Uh, so there was not like Apex coding or integration in-house coding that was needed. Uh, but there were scenarios wherein we had to implement a few Apex classes that did the call out, and then they were like simple get using get and then post methods. So yeah, I would say that I would have a fair idea of integrations and uh, testing them, obviously. We used HTTP mock call out mock, as we know that, we won't be able to make calls to the integrations in real time. Yeah.
Hmm. And you mentioned MuleSoft, so can you maybe tell me about why an organization would choose to use a middleware or an integration tool like MuleSoft versus building it out themselves in Apex?
Yeah, I think this would be organization specific. In my organization, they chose to use MuleSoft instead of developing those integrations in-house. First, the cost that is involved, and then time to market. So they needed things to be done quickly, so they chose clicks over code, and then maintainability. So obviously, when these kind of like complex integrations come into place, they would need a senior Salesforce developer who has quite a bit of experience in handling these kind of situations. As my last company was the insurance domain, so these were like sensitive things that needed to be working perfectly with no caveats or no loopholes. So just for the business reasons, they chose instead of relying on um, in-house Salesforce senior developers or Salesforce developer, they chose to use MuleSoft, which provided easier way to do these integrations. Yeah, to avoid complexity at that stage.
Okay, and that makes sense. And a lot of companies choose MuleSoft for these middlewares because they do add in a lot of features and functionality ready to go. Let's
Yeah.
say hypothetically right now, let's say you had an unlimited budget and you could do whatever you want, and to build this out in Salesforce, how how would you just like design it in your head, right? And you don't have to go through all the details of, how the business worked and all of that, but kind of give me a high level view of, how Salesforce would work, how it would interact with the other system.
Yeah. So I would start out with something simple. First, I would build out something that I would use, I think, say TDD approach, wherein I would write out my test classes first and then try and work out the basic functionalities first. So probably I would use get method to get something from the external system and see that it is coming into Salesforce in an expected format. So I would use something like JSON serialize, just going to details here, serialize and deserialize and see the kind of data that I'm getting from the external system. And for updating data to the external system from Salesforce, I would use post or put methods, and then and see how that is working out, and then definitely do all these things in the sandbox first, test it out, and make sure that once my tests work, I would move it to say full sandbox at last and see how things work, and then I feel if they work perfectly in staging environment, I would be confident to moving it to prod.
Yeah, I think that's a great overview, and definitely, there's a lot of nitty gritty that goes into it, which is fine with
Yeah,
any integration, but that's a great overview of how, you would grab data and then push it back out through to the other system.
yeah.
So I'll kind of open it up to you for right now. Do you have any questions for us about universal containers or how we work or anything like that?
Yeah, I would like a brief of the team structure, and I would like to understand more about universal containers with regards to the kind of tools, especially within the team, the kind of tools and kind of work culture that is there within the team, and then what are the expectations for person or onboarding as a junior or a mid-level developer, and then I would like to understand what are the immediate expectations immediately down the line, and then long-term expectations from the role.
Okay, so yeah, let's break those down. I think you've kind of gotten the overview of universal containers. We do sell widgets to a bunch of different customers globally, and we maintain all of that information inside of our Salesforce org. It is our source of truth for all of everything that we were doing. So a lot of the widgets that we were selling, the orders get processed through a third-party system, and there's integrations that go along with that. So having that integration background that you mentioned will definitely help out from that standpoint. The team structure is I'm the senior developer. We have two administrators and a Salesforce manager that sits above the entire team, and you'll be under them as well. From that standpoint, we all work very collaboratively. Hearing and seeing that there are, more admins to devs, you can imagine there's a lot of development work to be done. So this is where we're looking to bring somebody like yourself into that junior mid-level type of role to really help pick up on some of the different pieces. But we all work together very closely. We
Mhm.
have daily stand-up meetings to make sure that we're synchronized on a lot of the different tasks that we need to get done for the day and then throughout the week, making sure we're completing and moving towards our goals. And then finally, on the kind of expectations front, really for the short term, it's just wrapping your head around the organization, right? So helping out with those quick wins like the test classes and the smaller projects that we have lined up. And then long term, it's really owning certain sections of our code base. So, like I mentioned, there's the integration pieces, we have some order automation, and just some like backend automation that we need to get sorted, and we're looking for somebody to really start specializing in one of those areas so that we can move a lot faster when changes need to happen in all of those things. So Yeah, that's kind of the long-term vision, and of course that will continue to change and morph as we figure out what you like to do and a new project come on board. But that's the
Mhm.
initial idea as we get rolling here.
Okay, yeah, sounds great. May I know the combination of tools that you use at your in your team?
Sure, and so from that standpoint, we use Visual Studio Code for
Hmm.
all of our development, along with we do get an allocation for like the AI tools and things like that. So we're trying to stay a little bit up to date with that. And then we
Hmm.
have a sandbox structure that allows everybody to have their individual sandboxes as they do their work and then promote that up to a UAT sandbox and then moving to production once everything gets reviewed. Other
Hmm.
than that, in terms of tools, we use GitHub to store all of our repository, all of our metadata in a repository. So not
Hmm.
just the code, but also the org structure. And then we have some GitHub actions and automated processes to kind of do a review of our metadata as we're pushing it
Okay.
in there to make
Yeah.
sure that everything is up to different standards that we've put in for our code and our metadata. And then from there, I think that's the most of the major tools. Like, we use Slack and Zoom for different conversations and stuff like that, but those are the main development tools.
Yeah. Is there like um flexibility to choose different IDs at in the same team?
Yeah, it's really up to you to decide on the different IDEs. Like, do you have one in mind that you prefer to use?
I would use Illuminated Cloud. Yeah.
Okay. And why
Yeah.
would you use? I know I'm turning it back around, but why do you why would you want to use that IDE over Visual Studio Code? Not saying that it's wrong. I'm just curious if it's just a
Yeah.
preference or something.
I think the autocomplete is much better in Illuminated Cloud, and then just the UI and the kind of tools that integrate with JetBrains seem seamless compared to Visual Studio Code. Like I have used Visual Studio Code, but when it comes to end user experience, as a developer, I would prefer Illuminated Cloud over VS Code. So I hope that's not going to be a problem using different IDEs in the same team.
Definitely not. And from my standpoint, I've used Illuminated Cloud in the past. And it's really just personal preference and which one you want to use. I don't think it'll be an issue.
Yeah, yeah,
Cool. I do have some additional questions
yeah.
if unless you have some more.
Not at this stage yet.
Okay. So one of the main ones, and maybe a more general one, but can you kind of describe a time where you saw an opportunity to make like performance improvements or like push forward a new idea that will help move the organization along? And how did you maybe get buy-in from different people? How did you convince the rest of the team? How did you get that implemented?
Yeah. Um, the example that I would like to talk here about, there was a situation in my like immediate previous role, that is offshore, wherein the support team still used Classic. And there was a huge opportunity to not only move the entire support team that looked after all of the offshore brokers and other guest users that used community. There was a huge opportunity to rebuild the support system entirely, not only just moving them as it is from Classic to Lightning. So there, I jumped in. First, I started as a business analyst for that project and I understood the current situation. So the classic that was built for them was back in 2014. So there was a huge catch up to do from there. It was like almost 9 years that they have been using the same set of processes, same UI, and everything literally same. So I jumped in and understood what are the gaps and then what can be done better and what is missing. So I categorize them like what needs to be, delivered immediately so that they can start using Lightning right away. And then what can go in the immediate pipeline so that we can work towards it. And then what is something like nice to have. So, so I would broke it down into something that is achievable in 30, 60, and 90 days. So the team was on board with this approach. And the other thing that I helped team to, have their just to win the team over to move from classic to lightning because people were like so comfortable using classic. They they said that classic works for us. Why do we want to move? Because they had not realized the potential of Lightning. So I quickly spun up a Lightning sandbox and put together an app for support people to use with their mainly used functionalities that they have been using in Salesforce Classic. And then I also gave them something to compare with. Not only did they have their own Lightning tailor-made console. They also got to see something that I had built for finance department. So they got to see that these are all the cool things that we get to use if we move to Lightning, and then this is something that we are starting with. So they had a starting point, and they had a idea of how better it can get. So I gave them access to this sandbox, and then so they could test drive, and then I actively collected the feedback, and then this was just an iterative approach when we kept on improving based on the feedback. And then it was not an easy journey because people were comfortable using what they were using. And but because they could get a glimpse of what they could possibly be, opening up to, that's how I could, win their oats, and then, was able to migrate them successfully from Classic to Lightning.
Nice. And there's a few things I want to drill into there. I guess one of the main ones is that we know that users are pretty resistant to change, like you mentioned, and you worked with them to kind of show the benefits of making this change. Did you need to do anything with like maybe the key stakeholders, or how did you kind of measure if there was improvement based on the changes that you made?
Yeah. So because it was a bit hard to, convince them, the people that I started working with in support team is the support team leader. And the other person who was like very senior in the support system, who had been working in support for about 7 years. So that was the person who had amazing inputs about what can we do with regards to this Lightning, because he had spent so much time using this support classic console. I had a one-to-one discussion with this senior person of the support team, and then jotted down all the details, like the must-have ones, and just kept that conversation going. And so there was also a situation wherein the support team lead, was feeling like he's getting sidelined. So that was a difficult situation to deal with. So there I had to jump in and then, gain his confidence that this is not something about sidelining. It's just that the person is more experienced with regards to using the classic console. So that's why we're having this one-to-one conversation. So, and then we made sure that support team leader is included. So we had those conversations, and then we had his approval before actually delivering anything to prod, and then make sure that the features that we are building out is not only helpful for experienced members of the team, that is also equally helpful for new members who can traverse through the screen without much effort, and then it's nothing like wasting a ton of my time in finding things that are like really simple. So the process involved identifying most valuable information to be visible to the users first, and then organizing the UI strategically.
Okay. And yeah, I'm kind of smiling here because I remember at least when I first started with Salesforce, and um like struggling to figure out where everything is, even in the setup and how to
Yeah,
navigate. And then as you go along, you like almost memorize where everything is. So I think that's
yeah.
really interesting that you bring that up as a struggle for some of the users. Probably one of the last questions that I have here is, can you tell me about or potentially describe when you had a significant challenge when writing code and what was the situation and I guess what was the situation, what was the task, and how you overcame the issues that you're working with?
Yeah. So there was a situation wherein like we Osho had gone overboard with file storage. It was at 187%. So we had to bring it down to 100% just to, avoid from just avoiding that, over usage fees. Because Salesforce was taxing heavily, also that was something that had to be done. So for that, we used a tool called Own Backup, which is now called Own, wherein you could set up the policies to, archive the data. Um, my job was there to tell my lead exactly what objects can be archived. And if I archive these objects, how much will I be able to save? So my job was to give her exactly the number of the size of the data per year. So she wanted answers something like, so if I archive content documents of account, I should be able to save blah 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 17.5 GB for 21-22 for calendar year 21-22. So that was a huge review and analysis that I undertook, and then we implemented archive policies on our own. And I set up some test archive wherein it archived. But when the interesting thing was that we didn't know that when Salesforce actually deletes, it's just is deleted flag, that is deleted field, that is set to, true. And when you unarchive, it's just like recreating. It's not like it is creating records which are like brand new. It is something that that gets restored from the recycle bin. And in this scenario, there was a so these were the test records that got archived and unarchived just to test the process. If there was a situation wherein we had to unarchive, so on these case records, when they got unarchived, they obviously ran through the case assignment rules. And the case assignment rule, what it was doing was, because it ran through the case assignment rule, it wasn't restoring the case owner that was last assigned when the archiving took place. Instead, it was assigning the owner as per the case assignment rules. So that was a tricky situation wherein we had to come up with a trigger after undelete. I think we couldn't do that because Salesforce doesn't do that. Yeah, that is something that was really challenging, wherein we struggled to come up with a solution. What do we do in this case?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, unfortunately, that remained unsolved as I had to finish up with Osho. But I would love to understand, um, like I would have loved to understand how to resolve that issue, and then get it over. And then yeah, so that we could successfully archive and unarchive the records using own backup.
Okay, and I guess since it is a little bit unresolved, if you had to guess or maybe make some assumptions on like what would you do if you ended up staying and continued to work on it? How do you think you would have tried to solve it?
I think I would have definitely explored more to come up with the after undelete, and then make sure that I restore the case owner to what it was before it got actually deleted, like before it actually got archived.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that sounds great in terms of, definitely having a plan and going forward with that. I'll kind of wrap things up here. Do you have any last minute questions, thoughts that you want to bring up for me as we're continuing to talk?
Um, I think you have answered all the technical questions. I would like to understand a bit more about the uh, culture of the company with regards to work arrangements and um, yeah, just in general, the flexibility.
Yeah, so we're pretty laid back here. It is a hybrid type of policy, so we're in or expected to be in the office 2 days out of the week. But the other times, you can work remotely, and we kind of all try to coordinate to either be in on the same days, or some people like having that alone time, or I say focus time when you're in the office. But regardless, the culture is really nice. The leadership is great, and they see the value of Salesforce and how it really interconnects with the rest of the organization, and how it's the hub for a lot of the automations and things that we do. And from that standpoint, we're investing heavily in Salesforce and making sure that it's the centerpiece of our digital transformation. So um, from from that side of things, I think the team works really great together. Just from my perspective, I guess once you talk with the other teammates, you can see what they think about that. But I think everybody meshes pretty well. We understand our strengths and weaknesses, and we just try to help lift each other up as we go through and learn every day.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you so
Alrighty.
much for your time.
Well, thank you, Smita. It was great talking with you, and I'm sure somebody from HR will get back to you soon.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Talk with you soon.
Thank you.
All right, so Smita did an amazing job going through this interview. I asked her some pretty tough questions and really pushed her to drill down into some of the things that she was talking about. Overall, I think she did a great job answering questions and talking about her experience. Some of the things that I gave her feedback on, though, was really challenging her to explain a little bit deeper when she talks about certain things. You might have picked up on when she talks about best practices, sometimes she just kind of leaves it at that. And as an interviewer, we pick up on these things and wonder, okay, do you actually know what the best practices are? Or are you just kind of saying best practices as a catch all? So whenever you catch yourself doing that, make sure to explain a little bit more other than just saying, oh, it's a best practice. Tell me why it's a best practice. Other than that, I told her to brush up on some of the differences between before and after triggers. And there's a little bit of a gray area when we were talking about the opportunity example where I may have messed up a little bit, and where it's okay as an interviewee to stress or ask additional clarifying questions if things are not explained as well as you need them to be. So once again, I think Smita did great. A few different areas to polish up on. Of course, there are those filler words that everybody struggles with the ums and the ahs, and you don't see them when I'm talking because I can edit them out. But when you're in an interview, if you can really polish up that public speaking aspect of things, it really goes a long way into just being more presentable and being seen as that higher candidate compared to somebody else. Great job there from Smita. I asked really hard questions and she was able to handle them. I think if she practices a little bit more, really refine some of those initial things that she's going through, it will really help make this a perfect interview and move her on to that next phase and getting her hired. We dove deep into the development realm with this interview, but there are those basic questions that you almost always get asked, at least from HR and recruiters. So check out this video where I do a mock interview that goes over all of those questions. If this video was helpful, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. I'm Walters954 as always. Thanks so much for watching, and remember, I believe in you.